Our story begins not with a shadowy international terrorist cell, but in the sun-drenched, affluent suburbs of Orange County, California, a place of manicured lawns and shimmering swimming pools where the American dream wasn't just an ideal, it was a tangible reality. And at the heart of this reality was a man named Samir. To his neighbors, he was the epitome of that dream. A successful entrepreneur, a devoted family man, always ready with a warm smile and a firm handshake. He drove a sleek Mercedes, lived in a multi-million-dollar home, and was a pillar of his community. He was a man who had built his fortune from the ground up, a self-made success story. But every story has another side, a hidden chapter written in ink that only becomes visible under a certain light, and the light was about to change. The investigation into the attempted murder of Samir was, at first, a straightforward affair. The Orange County Sheriff's Department arrived at the scene of the shooting, a quiet, tree-lined street just moments from his home. Shell casings glittered on the asphalt. The window of his car was a spiderweb of fractures surrounding a clean, terrifying hole. It was a professional hit, clumsy in its execution but clear in its intent. The immediate assumption was a business deal gone sour, a jealous competitor, perhaps a personal vendetta. They began digging into Samir's life, turning over the clean, polished stones of his existence to see what might be crawling underneath. What they found was not a simple financial dispute. It was a labyrinth. Bank records showed a river of money flowing in mysterious directions. There were shell companies, offshore accounts, and transactions with figures whose names were red flags in a dozen international databases. The successful businessman was also a prolific fundraiser, a charismatic figure who could open wallets with a compelling story. But the story he was telling his wealthy donors was not the same one he was living. This is where our narrative fractures, splitting into two parallel, terrifying realities. While the Orange County detectives were following the money, the FBI was following a different trail, one of radicalization and terror. They had been watching a man named Adam. Adam was not a sophisticated international operative. He was a young, impressionable, and deeply troubled man from the dusty, forgotten corners of the Arizona desert. He was a convert, radicalized not in a foreign madrasa, but in the echo chambers of the Internet, in the dark corners of online forums where hate festered and promises of glory were sold to the disaffected. Adam was a blank slate, yearning for purpose, and he found it in the most toxic ideology imaginable. He was a lone wolf, or so it seemed. But every wolf needs a master. The connection was a thunderclap in the investigation. The money from Samir's complex web of shell companies was being funneled, in small, untraceable amounts, to Adam. The charismatic, smiling family man from the OC was allegedly bankrolling his own would-be assassin. The motive was as shocking as it was coldly logical: a life insurance policy. A massive, multi-million-dollar payout that would be triggered upon his death. But Samir, the mastermind, had no intention of dying. He had orchestrated a complex plot where he would be the victim of a terrorist attack. A martyr for a cause he didn't believe in, all to collect a fortune and disappear. He had found his pawn in Adam, feeding his radicalization, convincing him that Samir was an enemy of their shared faith, a target whose elimination would be an act of supreme devotion. He was weaponizing a young man's faith and desperation for a purely financial payoff. The stakes had just exploded from attempted murder to a foiled act of domestic terrorism. The arrest of Adam was a tense, quiet affair. FBI agents moved in on his dilapidated trailer in the dead of night, finding a cache of weapons and a mind poisoned by propaganda he could barely understand. He was confused, frightened, and utterly out of his depth. When confronted with the evidence, his carefully constructed world of ideological purity crumbled. He was a tool, and the realization was devastating. He told me it was the only way, Adam muttered during his interrogation, his voice a hollow echo in the sterile room. He said he was a wolf in sheep's clothing, that the world would be better. He said the money was for the cause. The cause was Samir's bank account. Samir's arrest was a different spectacle. It happened in broad daylight, outside his favorite upscale sushi restaurant. The image was jarring. The successful businessman in his tailored suit being handcuffed and led away by a phalanx of federal agents as his neighbors looked on in stunned disbelief. The two men, the master and the pawn, were now on a collision course with justice. The ensuing courtroom drama was a masterclass in deception and its unraveling. The prosecution, led by a dogged attorney who saw the case for the unprecedented betrayal it was, laid out their evidence with methodical precision. They painted a picture of Samir as a man of monstrous greed, a puppeteer who had pulled the strings of terror for profit. The life insurance policy was the centerpiece, a monument to his avarice. But Samir was not a man to go quietly. He fought back with every weapon at his disposal. He hired a brilliant, aggressive defense team that went on the offensive. Their strategy was as audacious as the crime itself. They argued that Samir was the real victim. They claimed he was a man living in fear, that he had been coerced and threatened by shadowy, unknown radicals. The money transfers, protection payments, the ideological talks with Adam, an attempt to reason with a fanatic. They painted Adam not as a pawn, but as the genuine, independent terrorist, and Samir as a desperate man trying to save his own life. They worked to dismantle Adam's credibility, highlighting his mental instability, his history of drug use, his easily led nature. They tried to put the ideology itself on trial, hoping the jury would see only the fanatic and not the man who funded him. For a while, it worked. The case became murky, a battle of narratives where the simple, horrifying truth was in danger of being lost in the fog of legal warfare. The trial wore on for weeks, then months. The tension in the courtroom was a physical presence, a thick, suffocating blanket. Adam, from the witness stand, was a broken figure, his testimony often halting and confused. Samir, meanwhile, was the picture of calm, respectable indignation. He took detailed notes. He shook his head in apparent sadness at the accusations. He played the part of the wrongly accused businessman to perfection. It seemed the scales of justice might be tipping. The prosecution's case, while strong on paper, was struggling to land the final, decisive blow. They needed something undeniable. They needed a moment that would cut through the defense's smokescreen and reveal the chilling, calculating monster beneath the suit. They got it. The climax of the trial did not come from a surprise witness or a newly discovered piece of forensic evidence. It came from the puppeteer's own voice. In a stunning move, the prosecution introduced a series of recorded phone calls from the jailhouse. These were calls between Samir and a relative, conversations he believed were private and protected. The courtroom fell into a dead silence as the audio began to play. There was no talk of fear, no mention of shadowy threats. Instead, the jury heard the real Samir. His voice was calm, calculating, and utterly devoid of remorse. He was not worried about his fate. He was managing a business transaction that had gone awry. He discussed legal strategy as if it were a corporate merger. He expressed frustration at the incompetence of his hired gun, Adam, not anger at being targeted. "The idiot couldn't even do the one job he was made for," Samir said, his tone dripping with contempt. And then, the line that sealed his fate. He was heard coolly discussing the life insurance policy, not as a tragic necessity, but as a failed investment. "It was a clean, simple plan," he said, almost to himself. "A story of terror, and I was going to be the victim. The perfect, blameless victim. No one questions a dead man, especially a dead man killed by a terrorist." In that moment, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. The jury saw not a victim, not a businessman, but a man who saw human life, both his own and others, as a commodity, and terrorism as a convenient plot device in his story of greed. The verdict was swift. Guilty on all counts. Samir was sentenced to decades in federal prison, a kingpin of his own pathetic empire of lies. Adam, the broken weapon, received a lesser but still substantial sentence. A young life consumed by a hatred he was taught and a crime he was manipulated into committing. The story had all the elements of a classic thriller: the double life, the hired assassin, the shocking twist. But this was not fiction. This was a stark reminder that the face of terror is not always a stranger's. Sometimes it's the face of the man next door, a man who sees not a cause to die for, but a story to exploit, and who will unleash unimaginable fear for nothing more than a price tag. The most terrifying monsters are not the ones who believe in their cause, but the ones who see your cause as nothing more than a means to an end. If stories like this keep you hooked, hit subscribe for more.